Welcome everybody to Aerospace Live. I'm hoping you're all having a great day today. Now for tonight, we have a truly special guest. And to be honest, this really might be the most important guest I've ever had on. I think that she's going to be a little surprised to hear that. But I really do think it's true. So our guest tonight, she's not a pilot. She's not an astronaut. She doesn't work at the FAA. She's a wife and she's a mom. And so why is that important? And why is it so important that I think a wife and mom, as important as they all are to us, why do I think that this individual might be the most important person I've had on the show so far? She's a military wife and she's a military mom. Her husband was a fighter bomber pilot during Vietnam. He was shot down. He had to eject a couple times, I believe. And she spent her life as a military wife, military mom. She has her own career behind her, but that's not our story today. And her story is really important for many of our service members and their spouses. Which is why I'm asked her to come on, and she's been so grateful to spend her time with us. Now, I do want to ask you to do something. If you know anyone in the military or a spouse or someone who might be going into the military, I want you to share this with them. I make no money from any of these shows. These shows aren't monetized. There's no ads. If I get one person who watches a show or I get 1 million people who watch this show, it has nothing to do with me. I want to get her story out. I think it's really important for those military moms and the wives and the spouses in general. There's a lot of women in the military nowadays. Okay, with that, let's waste no more time. Let's get to our host today. And in addition to everything I said, Sarajane is also an author. She has written this book here, if you're watching on YouTube, called My Pilot. Let's welcome Sarajane Giere. Hey, Sarajane, how are you doing?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm fine tonight. I'm looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Well, we're really happy to have you on with us tonight. I wanted to start off letting the readers know, or not readers, letting the listeners know and the watchers know. I saw your book, and it's not typically the type of book that I would typically read. I'll be honest with you. I typically am one of these geeky pilot guys. I want the flight manuals. I want the technical stories. I don't usually get into the emotional type books. I also, not to embarrass myself in front of everybody, I don't typically cry very easy when it comes to, unless it's a Disney movie, because they kill all the parents in the Disney movies. But when I'm reading a book, I usually don't get too emotional. I finished your book the other day, and I had to hide my face from my children because I did have a tear in it. And so with that, I'm talking way too much. And I know the folks want to listen to you, but I wanted to give them a little introduction. And again, for the folks that are online, and listen, if you're listening to this in a podcast, put your phone in your pocket. I want you to hear this whole thing. If you're watching online, I want you to look down below in the description, and I want you to find this book on Amazon. And if you have a military spouse, or if you know somebody who's a military spouse, Christmas is coming up. This would be a great present for them. This is really a fantastic book. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Otherwise, I'll talk all night. So Sarajane, usually I start with, how did you get started in flying? And that's not the case here. So let me ask you this question. So where did you and your husband, first of all, for those that don't know your husband, because your husband actually was kind of a big name in the military. So who was your husband?
Well, his name was Bernard Dietrich Giere. And in the Air Force, they called him Ben. With a name like Bernard, you get a lot of nicknames. He's been called Barnyard, Ben. In Vietnam, Ben was his name, but Bernie is what we call him.
Now, how did you meet Bernie?
Met him when we were students at Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And he came from Chicago, and I was from St. Louis. And we met there. He was ahead of me, half a year ahead of me. And we fell in love. So it was as easy as that. And then we fell so much in love, we wanted to get married because there were a lot of students there that were married. And so I told my mother, and she said, well, how are you going to support yourselves? You're in school. I said, well, yeah, you got a point there. So I went home. Bernie was still in school. I went home and stayed with my parents and got a job at the telephone company. And I saved every penny. I made about $62.50 a week. Oh. And then the next fall we got married, and we lived up near the campus for a semester, graduated in January. And then 4 months later, we were off to pilot training. So,
oh. So you married him, you knew he was going to be a military pilot, and You knew kind of what you were getting yourself into?
Yeah, but he was in ROTC, and in those days, it was a Presbyterian land grant college, liberal arts, and all the guys had to be in ROTC 2 years.
Probably.
It was required. So he was in there, and he loved it. Wow, he wanted to stay in there, and if you stayed and passed, you would get a commission on graduation, and you served 5 years in the Air Force. It was Air Force ROTC. So that's what he decided to do. He loved it. He ended up the colonel of the ROTC students, the commander, and he learned to fly at the little airport there. And it was 5 years ahead of us. We were getting what we thought was a good salary. He was. And so that's how we met at school.
Now, when he joined ROTC, had the Vietnam War already started?
No, this was in 1957, 8.
Okay. All right. So that was prior to. So he started his aviation career in the military prior to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Now, what type of airplane did he fly?
Well, in school, he flew a tripacer.
Oh, cool.
And they took 5 of the fellows. I think they were seniors then. And the deal was, why send a guy to flight school and have the Air Force move you and pay for it for a year and you flunk out? Mm-hmm. Some people love the air, some people don't. So there were 5 fellows, and he and his roommate were the only 2 that came out of it. One fella got sick, one fella hated it. So the 2 of them walked away with the second lieutenant bar and their little flight license. So when they got to the Air Force flight school, they learned how to fly the jets. So
very cool. And then later on, I believe in Vietnam, he was flying F-4s, correct?
Flying the Phantom F4, F4B, and then F4C.
Okay. Mm-hmm. A good military wife, you actually knew the difference between the B's and the C's. So that's good.
Yeah, well, I'm from St. Louis, and it was made at McDonnell Aircraft, it was called then.
Oh, that's cool.
And they were making the F4s. It was the hottest plane around. In fact, he used to go up, before I went to Vietnam, they fly him up commercially from MacDill Air Force Base, and he'd get the plane right off the assembly line and bring it back.
Oh, that's cool.
That new. So.
Now, the first time that this kind of goes into the military wife, and you guys were married at the beginning of this. So, yeah. so as a military wife, what type of support? Now, the war hadn't started yet, but was Bernard, did he have to travel even at the beginning? Was he away from you even at the beginning, even before the war started?
Oh yeah, he spent. Well, they were always going away for something, and you could volunteer for things. So he volunteered for parachute, Fort Benning, to get his flight wings parachute, and he volunteered for FAC, forward air controller training. And then they would go on these cross countries to do certain things with planes out in Nevada or whatever. They'd play setup war games, I called it. Mm-hmm. And then he was in Okinawa in 64 for 3 months. And it was the first group of F4s to fly from Tampa all the way to Okinawa. And it set a big record. So it was a new thing. It was exciting for him.
Now, when he was away, being a young military wife, you were probably, if you were just out of college, you were probably 21, 22 years old, probably around that age, right?
Yeah, I was a little older. I was, I think when Lisa was born, I was 23. She was born in 63.
Okay. Now, how did you, now you're a young lady yourself. You've got a young child. What were some of the things that you did? And this is actually why I think it's important to have this conversation. So what were some of the things that you did that tried to help when your husband was away?
To try to help, can you expand that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I probably didn't ask that right.
Or help who?
Yourself, really. So what were some of the things you did to help, like, if, you were worried about him when he was away, or, just to kind of keep in contact with him, keep close with him. You see a lot of military spouses and relationships that don't make it, right? and that was because of they're apart, and for whatever reason it doesn't work, and that's one of the reasons why. And I'll tell you, and the folks that are listening, the biggest thing I got when I was when I was reading your book here, was just you guys, at least the way it sounded in the book, you guys never lost that spark for each other. And so that was really touching. And so if somebody was new, if their spouse was going in the military, let's say they might be going to Afghanistan or, whatever, overseas place they might be going for, say, 6 months, a year, a couple of years. What would be some of your recommendations to them for how to handle that?
Well, I think I would always joke with, after we got out of the service and we were in civilian life, people would say, well, how could you do that when your husband was away and all of a sudden you had a baby and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And we kept in touch. And that's one advice. My son, my late son, who passed away this year, he was in Iraq and Kuwait. They had email. And they had their cell phones. I didn't have any of that. We had letters. And we got hooked up surreptitiously by a phone operator in California. We got to speak, but it was rare. And it was also that kind of shortwave radio where you talk and then they talk. And then it goes click, click. But we did, and some of the wives would make tapes. They had the old-fashioned tape deck, and they would make tapes of themselves with the kids and everything, and they would send it to Vietnam, and they could watch it over there. But I think the letters were important, and hearing his voice was wonderful. But
yeah, two stories that I had. I don't want to spoil anything for the listeners. You had, one thing you inside your book. I don't think this is spoiling. You have a lot of those snippets of those letters that your husband sent you. Did you keep most of them, or?
I kept them all.
Wow.
And I kept the letters that I wrote him when I was at home working and he was still in school. From that time that we parted and had that year apart, I kept all of our letters. And I had my letters too.
Mm-hmm.
For the Vietnam time in Okinawa, I didn't have my letters. I just had his letters. So I did save them. And and I would reread them all the time. So.
Yeah. So just that communication, I think that's something that people take for granted nowadays because we're surrounded by satellites and video conferencing and, we had nothing like that, back then. So, getting a letter was kind of a big deal.
It wasn't just a talent. It was something that a lot of them felt compelled to do to keep up the contact. There was one couple I mentioned in the book who they never wrote to each other much. We really liked them. They were lovely people. But for them, it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to have that letter in my pocket of my robe, or I had to feel close. And I think he felt the same way. They told him to burn my letters because the people that worked at this base that was built in sand in Cam Bay, the women that came in and did the laundry and everything, the local people, they didn't want to see return addresses sitting around. I don't know why, but it was, maybe they could sell the letter and whatever. But so he didn't save my letters, but I have all his. So.
Wow. Yeah. No, I thought that was touching. And the item was the telephone operator.
Bert Pratt. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you say you dropped out just a quick second? What was her name?
Bert Pratt.
Bert Pratt. Now she actually ran a clandestine, and I want people to read this in your book for more information, but it sounded like she was running a clandestine after hours connection, to be able to get the folks that are overseas and their spouses together. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that get started? How did you find out that connection was available?
I had no idea. And he left in September. And then I went up to his parents' home in Chicago, right in the city, for Christmas with my daughter. And she was about 2. And one night I was alone in the back porch. It was a cold porch. And my mother-in-law was very German, and she kept all of her cookie tins and things on this cold porch. And the phone rang, and it was uh, "Hi, honey, it's me." And I just fell apart. I couldn't believe it. Um, and she hooked us up at that time, and we had a conversation, but I could hardly get out the words. It was terrible. That's when I found out about it, and that was a December. And so occasionally she would call again, but the guys would line up. And I think it, and I'm not sure it's clandestine, but I don't think she was supposed to do it because we heard rumors about her throughout Bernard's tour that, well, maybe she was reprimanded for it because it was like a shortwave type thing.
Mm.
And but she was actually our lifeline. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I don't
Really.
even remember that from the book. So the first time she called you, you didn't even know the call was coming. So that was a complete surprise
No,
to you.
I had no idea. I thought I would never hear his voice ever again because I
Oh,
wasn't one of the mothers that did tapes. Um, and I was on a tape with Sandy. She did both of us and the kids. But Jim, his friend Jim, was a real techie, and he had all the tapes and everything. But Bernie, did not interest us to go that way. We wrote letters and occasionally talked on the phone. So
hmm. Now, when was your husband away the birth of your first child, Lisa?
no, he was there. He was in Tampa.
Oh,
His
good.
parents, his mother had come down.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. How about your son? Was he there for the birth of your son?
No, he was in Vietnam. Paul was born when he was in Vietnam. There were four of us wives pregnant when they left.
Mhm.
And he was born May 21st. And then Bernard came back in September. So he was about 4 months old.
Now, going into the years of Vietnam, because there was a couple of things I found really fascinating and pretty emotional. First of all, anybody can get hurt in a training accident. There was a situation talk about in the book in one of the helicopters that had crashed. And we'll talk about that in a second because I want to talk to you about meeting with the wives of the pilots. But when Vietnam had started, it seems like the wives got closer together. And was that true? Were you guys really kind of a support system for each other?
Yes, we were. hmm
And
Yeah. In fact, the first Thanksgiving, when he was away, Thanksgiving, we got a big room at the officers club, and all the wives came with all their kids. And I'd never seen that before. It was great. But we didn't do it all the time, but we kind of helped each other out and did social. We played cards and did volunteer work together. And yeah, it was quite wonderful. Bernie was in the triple nickel when he first went to Tampa. And then when he went to Vietnam, they split it, and he became a member of the 557th. And so therefore, when he left, I only knew these wives of the new squadron for a couple of months. So that was kind of a new support system for me. And it was fine. And some of the wives went home for the year, but I decided to stay there. So
and for the folks listening, the triple five, the triple nickel was the 555th, which was a fighter wing, correct?
mhm.
Cool.
It has
Um,
a long history.
oh yeah, yeah. And anybody who's interested in aviation, you can look up the 555th, the triple nickel. Some good stories around that group. So now, when you had, let's say you were in one of the wives, the groups at the base. If you had a brand new, because you probably had new people coming in all the time, right? So, if you had a new wife coming in, did you guys reach out to that new wife, or how did the new person, like if somebody, it's probably different today, but back during Vietnam, how did you guys reach out to the new spouses?
Well, during the Vietnam time, there were no new spouses because they'd been together and they went over as a group.
Okay.
And there was no replacements coming through as far as I knew, because there was nobody that walked in there about the group. But before that, in the triple nickel, we had coffees all the time. And I would have a coffee at my house, and there might be 30 women there. And a couple of us would make the goodies, and I'd make coffee and tea, and we all chit chat together and introduce ourselves to each other if we didn't know most of the time. But yeah, it was really and then when tragedies happen, like Cos Musgrove was killed The first, even before Bernard went, he was from Tampa from the Air Force Base, but he went over the year before. And I saw what happened when a pilot died like that, and everybody came together. And it was awesome, really.
Mhm.
Scary for me, but
Yeah. So I hope, I hope that folks today, I know, the years go by, right? But a lot of times the same things that were beneficial in the past are beneficial today. So I do hope that anybody, any spouses from military, either current or in the future, I do hope that they reach out to groups like that. I have to imagine that group made the whole situation, which was probably extremely tough at times, it made it just that little bit easier.
Oh, it was a lot easier, right? And we wanted to make it as normal as possible because of our children. And we came together on one Easter, and the squadron commander's wife, I think she had 4 or 5 children. And I was just, oh my gosh, how do you do that? I was pregnant with Paul, my second child, and we just couldn't get over it. She was so great. And the older kids helped the younger kids. And I still have pictures of that. That was a lot of fun. And the kids enjoyed getting to know other kids because mine were not in school. My daughter was in nursery school maybe, but not. So yeah, it was wonderful. And a lot of the wives went home on Christmas. I did. Went to my in-laws' house, and yeah, it was really wonderful to be part of a community. And we had family services. We would help out in family services. So when a new person came to the base, if they were enlisted especially, everything was so new that in family services, we would donate things and we would help them out. It was like a giant thrift shop. Here you are. What do you need? We're here for you. And that was across the grades, the military grades. It was great.
That's nice. That's not just the officers that was enlisted. No. That was everybody.
Right.
That's really nice. Yeah. So I hope that folks that, hear your voice, possibly read your book, that's one of the things they get out of it. If they're going to be going into that situation, is to make sure that they build that social circle around them for that support. They're not there alone. They shouldn't feel like they're there alone, and it can really help them. So one of the unfortunate things that happened, obviously the Vietnam War, not everybody came home, right? So, and you, your husband, other members of, his squadron, the not the duty, right? Nobody told you guys to do it, but you guys, you have good hearts, right? So you wanted to make sure that if somebody found out, some really bad news, that you were there to support them. First of all, thank you for doing that, just as a human being. But, how did you summon the courage, to do that?
Well, I've often wondered about that. Well, I'm a Christian and I have deep faith, and I think that my steps were being directed. I think it was the Holy Spirit that came over me. And my mother had died in 1965, right before Bernard went to Vietnam. And I weathered that funeral, and I learned from it. And I learned from the older officers' wives who had gone through many funerals. And there's strength in numbers, I think, because you always wonder if it's going to happen to you. You would want somebody near you like you would like to be with someone else, mm-hmm. and help them. It's a mutual society. For those wives that never fit in as an officer's wife, their marriage didn't really last past Vietnam, ones I knew. And, it's better to just go with the flow and be part of the community than fight it. You can't really. And part of it is a sadness. It's just part of life. But when you're struck down so young, it's tragic.
Mm-hmm. By the way, this is going to be unfair for the people on the podcast, and it's totally going a different direction. But I just noticed your necklace. I really like that necklace. She has a airplane on her necklace. That's really pretty. I like that.
Well, when my husband died 7 years ago, my oldest granddaughter bought them for the women in the family. So I wear it every day. And last year it was so worn out and awful. It wasn't an expensive thing. I had it reproduced in silver.
Hmm.
And then I had a diamond chip put in the cockpit.
Oh.
And I told the guy, I said, well, Bernie was a gem, so I'm going to put a little diamond there. So that's what I wear.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
Moving past Vietnam. So, well, actually, right at the end of Vietnam, for your husband, he was shot down, if I remember correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had to eject, and he was pulled out by a helicopter, I believe.
Right.
Now he came home right after that, correct?
Yes, they were supposed to come home a couple months later, but he had made 2 ejections, and his buddy, his co-pilot, made 3. So the colonel said, "We're not going to risk it again. You guys go home."
Yeah. There's there's the unwritten rule: 3 and out. You eject 3 times, you go home.
Right.
So he came home, and then he did what any pilot would do. He went to go work for the airlines, right?
Well, he had to spend another year for his 5-year commitment.
Okay.
And stayed at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. He was an instructor pilot, and all that time and that year, he loved the job. He was interviewing with airlines. He got accepted to 5 major airlines. You knew you had to fly to Kansas City, you had to fly here and there, and you had to take physical courses, physical exams. So by the time his year was up, he accepted Pan Am. It was between Pan Am and TWA. And my sister had been a TWA stewardess, but he picked Pan Am, and we moved to New York.
Now, for some of my younger listeners, because I'm with Civil Air Patrol, so we have some of our cadets are 14, 15, 16, 17, some ROTC kids, just like how your husband was when he was in college. And so a lot of them probably don't know what TWA and Pan Am are.
Okay.
So Pan Am and TWA, for those that don't know, it's basically like Southwest and American Airlines, but they were the 2 largest. You didn't have 400 little airliners, airline companies. You had these 2 really big ones. Which company did he go to work for eventually?
Pan Am.
The one thing that struck me when I was reading the book, because this really kind of ties into current day today, because of the furloughs. Yeah. He got his job, and then a little bit while later he got furloughed. So how did you guys work on that?
We were just taken aback by that. We just thought that it couldn't happen to a big, stable airline like that. How dare it happen? It did 3 times for him. And then when Pan Am, after the 3rd furlough, which was about 15 years, he was out from the airlines. When Pan Am folded, Delta Airlines stepped in and bought the international planes and the crew. They were dying to fly international. And so Bernie was flying the A310 to Europe. And he went from Pan Am to Delta, which was very lucky. And flew with Delta. He would say, "I just took off my white hat and put my black hat on."
Yeah. Now, one of the ways that he got through that time is he went back into the service, right?
Well, his first furlough, he joined the Air National Guard. We were on Long Island, and he found out from a friend that the tankers were down at Floyd Bennett Field in New York. And they were looking for Air Force experienced pilots. So he joined the Air National Guard in Brooklyn. And then that next year they moved out to West Hampton Beach in the Hamptons. And then they started flying F-102s, and he's checked out in that. He flew the tanker for a while that used to refuel him in Vietnam. He was flying it. So they changed missions a lot. So the last mission stayed. It was rescue and recovery. Mm-hmm. And he flew the C-130, and they had helicopters, the HH-3E and the C-130 and the PJs. And that was very rewarding. Very rewarding. They're still doing it.
Yeah, a lot of us in Civil Air Patrol we're here, to help with that search and rescue mission. Yeah. We don't do it for military type activities, but inland U.S. I forget what the number is, and I'm sure somebody will correct me down in the chat. But I want to say it's like 80 to 90% of the inland Air Force missions for search and rescue come to Civil Air Patrol. So
I didn't know that. Oh,
yeah,
that's fascinating.
yeah, we have the largest single engine fleet of aircraft in the world in Civil Air Patrol.
Wow.
Um, and
That's neat.
yeah, during World War II, we actually started off by patrolling the coast looking for submarines.
Oh, I
Um,
can believe that. Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately, they don't let us drop bombs anymore out the windows like they used to. But at least nobody's ever given me a bomb to drop out. But yeah, so when I read that he went to the search and rescue side of it, that had to have been pretty exciting for him because he really went from flying fighter jets, where he's in this, relatively, right, compared to a C-130, relatively small airplane, by himself, or a two-seater, because I think he flew a two-seater, right? I think he
Yeah.
had a wheel in the back. So, he flew a two-seater, but, he gets into this, all of a sudden he transitions into this really big airplane, which also probably also helped because it kept all his currency up. So then Pan Am eventually came back, right? And they offered him a job again.
He was furloughed 3 times with Pan Am, and he flew the Boeing 707, and then he was on the Airbus airplanes. I don't know if he flew a 727, but he was always training in something new.
Oh, that's cool.
And got more computerized as the years went on.
Yeah,
So,
it's
but
all computers now. So
yeah.
you're as much
And
a
he loved
computer
the
operator as a pilot.
C-130. It was just very easy. Yeah. And then, of course, the helicopters that rescued him, and here he was working with the helicopter guys. He really loved it.
That's good. That sounds like a good life to live. Exciting life, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like a desk job would have fit him well. So now when also it's a good story too for the folks that are today, right? Because a lot of our folks, especially the younger folks, are just graduating from college. They might be getting, looking for their first airline job, which is bad timing for them because of all the furloughs and the slowdown. But it's going to come back, right? I mean, all these, these airlines are going to need people again, whether it's next year or the year after. So unfortunately, furloughs are part of that business, right? I mean, you had to deal with it for 3 times and 15 years in between 2 of the furloughs.
Yeah, but less than a year apart on some. But you know what? A lot of airline people had other jobs. Like a good friend of ours was a captain, TWA, but before he was a captain, he was laid off for not as long as we were, not at all. But he would build decks on people's houses. He and Bernie eventually, when they retired, would rehab a house and sell it. They had those other talents besides sitting in a cockpit. So that came in handy too during a furlough. So
now I wanted to ask you one thing. Maybe this is actually where I teared up a little bit. So I'm going to be careful because you're not going to get me crying on the camera here. So your husband unfortunately came down with ALS, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you like, a bunch of questions, I guess, but how did you guys first recognize that was happening?
What we thought was a bad back and the way he was walking. He had a wonderful holistic chiropractor that helped out. But it was a relative of my daughter's who noticed and hadn't seen him in over a year or two. It's hard when you live with somebody and they do this gradually, but she hadn't seen him and she made a remark about the way he walked was very different. So I started looking at it from a stranger's point of view. Does this man look like normal? Well, that was the beginning of it. And it's very hard to detect, especially in the beginning. But that's what happened. It was just gradually coming on, and it was getting the diagnosis. Sometimes it takes almost a year to get a diagnosis because you go from doctor to doctor. I know a gal I taught with died of ALS within 2 years after she retired. She thought it was a bad back, and she had her back operated on, and she had all these ideas, but that wasn't it. It has to be a correct diagnosis.
Now, for some of our listeners, again, they may be younger. They may not know what ALS is. I think you'd probably do a really good job of explaining that.
It's called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And each word has a meaning in Greek, but it's the gradual, your nerves send a signal to your muscles for everything you do in your body. And when the nerves start, like sclerosis means to shrivel up into nothing, into little things that aren't effective, you have no muscle power. You can't hold a pencil. You think, what's wrong with this? And There are different kinds of ALS. Some attack first the legs and the spine, which was Bernie. Some attack the swallowing, the bulbar it's called, and the upper body. And they have the feeding tube right away, and the breathing becomes untenable. So that's how we knew. Somebody pointed it out, and then my kids, Paul and Lisa, were very reactive, and they were kind of pushing me. And Lisa said her friend had a sister who was a pretty well-known pulmonologist in New York City, and he was having a little breathing problem. So that's where we started, Dr. Adrizzo. And he went with her for a while, and then she recommended he go see Dr. Lang at the Hospital of Special Surgery. He is an expert in ALS. He's traveled around the world giving talks. And with that clinic, every time we would go into the city, we'd park, we'd have to walk to the hospital. Not only would the doctor see him, but there were 5 staff people, the physical therapist, occupational therapist. They all took a look at him and had him do these games where you put the blocks in the spaces and that kind of thing to see your coordination. And they kept track of it. So that was wonderful for us until one was established on Long Island by the Pendergast, who were wonderful at helping us with ALS Ride for Life. So then we would go to Stony Brook University area and see Talcott for the clinic, and the same thing. The doctor would see us and take turns with Bernard. So it was a process. It's a process, and your caregivers get, like the military, your caregivers come together through the help of Christine Pendergast. And her husband had it for 28 years.
Wow.
And he raised millions of dollars.
28 years. I thought that, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I always thought ALS was like a 5-year thing.
It is. It is.
So 28 years.
A small percentage, like 5%, live a longer life. So he established this clinic on Long Island, and he started out by riding their wheelchairs down to Washington, D.C. to go, to the congressmen and so on. But it was really tied to baseball. Then they would go in all through Long Island, stop at the schools, give talks, raise money. It became hundreds and eventually millions of dollars, and it would go to the stadium. But they wouldn't go to Washington after that. So yeah, it was great.
And so for our younger folks, ALS, you might have also heard it as, I believe, Lou Gehrig's disease, correct?
Lou Gehrig, right.
Yeah. That's why the tie into baseball as well. So, and again, the story, and you actually mentioned it too in your response. So the key there, I think the key takeaway is don't be alone. You surrounded yourself with a support structure to help support yourself. It was a family, it was, staff at the hospital. You got involved in the Ride for Life. You made sure that you always had that support. Your husband always had that support as well. Whether it was people that was in his squadron, whether it was the telephone operator surprising you with that first call. It's always important to make sure you have community. So that's kind of the story with your husband. I wanted to take a few minutes, if you're okay with it. You had mentioned about your son, and I was really sorry to hear that your son had passed away. So tell us a little bit about your son.
Well, Paul was born when Bernard was in Vietnam. That's the one letter I can't find because I guess I held it close to my heart when he found out. But he went to Coe College, the same college we went to and graduated. He was a photography and art major, like his son, who just graduated from Coe College. And he told me, he worked with a famous photographer in the city his senior year. And I said, well, are you going to go into photography? He says, no, Mom, you can't make a living at it. So he lived with us for a while, saved his money, joined the Air Guard, went to training in basic training, I guess, in Texas. And he was a little older than most of the trainees. So he really took to it. So then he bought himself a little cottage near us, a little summer place, and stayed with the Guard. And he went to fire school and became a volunteer fireman in East Quogue, New York. He loved that. So then he joined the fire department at the Air Guard, which was very specialized because it's right on the runway there. It's part of the whole group, and they know how to put out special fires from different kind of propellants. And they would do the space shuttle. They would guard that. They would go down with the C-130 and the helicopter, and were designated because there were only two rescue groups in the States, California and Long Island. So he really enjoyed it. He was very good, and he was so busy with three kids that he gave up the local job, the volunteer fireman, and he stuck with the fire department at the Guard. Then he retired after 23 years and went with the Suffolk County Water Authority. He was a great dad. He was a wonderful son. He was into motorcycles, and not the street kind, the kind that did the competitions and all that. So I think he took me riding once, and I asked him, I said, now you have two sons and a daughter. Please don't get them involved. Well, his one son, his youngest, is a junior in high school now. And he built his own bicycle, his regular bike. He builds ramps. He's very talented that way. He built it from scratch. Paul helped him. But he's not into motorbikes, thank goodness. So, but yeah, it's a great loss for us. And my daughter-in-law is remarkable. She's working, and the three kids are at home. One's in law school on her computer. One's graduated and has a job on a computer, and then the high schooler. So they're all together. And without COVID, I just can't whip over there when I want to. I did go the first week of September because there were two birthdays, but yeah, we miss him a lot. We really do. And but she had support when he went to Iraq and Kuwait. So some of their good friends were, over there too. And when they went, they took the Guard group as a group to do the firehouse. I believe it was in Kuwait. And I would ask Paul, the Brits were there, they did the food, and then his fire department did security. And I said, now you weren't in trouble over there. You weren't in the hot firing part. And he'd say, no. So then years later, somebody said, well, didn't they toss missiles over the fence where you, well, yeah. But he wouldn't admit it. They won't tell their mothers,
Yeah, no, Mom, I'm staying at the Hilton. They give us, yeah, we have breakfast in bed, and it's all good. Don't worry about it. Yeah. That's what they say, right?
I see a lot of good qualities that he had in his kids, and why he married such a sweet gal. So I think they're going to be all right. But it's just tough at age 53,
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that for you. It does. One thing between your son and your husband, again, I don't know anything about either situation, to be honest. But for your husband with ALS, a lot of folks that were pilots that were flying back then, they if they had Agent Orange in the area, they were flying through it with their airplanes. And I believe the VA considers ALS, the Vietnam War, as a precondition for ALS for service members. Was that true?
That came to pass while he, within the last 6 or so years of his life, because his friend, who he ejected with twice, lived in Florida, and he had Parkinson's and lung cancer.
And Parkinson's, I believe, is another one.
He went to the VA down there all the time, and he's the one that would call Bernie and say, I hope they make ALS a compensating disease or something. So they did.
Okay. So he got a little bit more support from the VA that way.
He did, and they gave him things to help him get out of bed, and yeah, they were pretty good. Okay. And my daughter spent a lot of time, because they live in New Jersey, driving to Long Island a couple hours and being with us. She was great. And towards the end, we got a hotel room near the hospital, and then Paul would commute out, so it was great. She's great. I love being near them. She adopted twin boys from the hospital when they were just born. She had two teenage daughters. So she's got a 31-year-old daughter with a baby who's a year and a half. And then she has an 28-year-old daughter, and she has twin boys that are 15.
I didn't catch it. Who is this?
My daughter.
Oh, your daughter. So your daughter, Lisa.
Lisa.
Okay.
And so I go to a lot of football games and lacrosse. And here in New Jersey, I'm learning all that through my twin grandsons.
Yeah, we love lacrosse. Lacrosse is I came from Rochester, New York before I moved down to South Carolina. And Rochester, New York and Buffalo, New York, and it's near Toronto in Canada. And so lacrosse is like all there is. Like we don't even care about football. We care about lacrosse. So that's great. So hopefully what we got to do is we got to get this COVID thing over with so we can get you back to hanging out with all these grandkids. For Thanksgiving, we just had for those folks that are listening, maybe, people might listen to this 3 years later, right? So when we're making this, we're in 2020, we just had Thanksgiving. So how did you celebrate Thanksgiving? Did you do it over video chats or?
My daughter took her family down to Cape May, and they rented a house for a few days, 3 days. I opted not to go because I live in a retirement community. It's a continuing care community. I have my own cottage and I have a lot of independence, but they have strict COVID rules because it's hit New Jersey so badly. She lives in Summit and I live in West Caldwell. It's a half an hour apart. And in November, there were 200 new cases in her little community, Summit, New Jersey. So we have to be very careful. And I said, I see you kids. We haven't hugged or kissed since last Christmas, but we see each other. And I said, I don't want to go down there and rent that with you and sit there and then have to come back and closet myself for 2 weeks. I just don't think it's worth it. So I stayed here and I'm glad I did. I got a lot done with my website, my new website and all that. So
cool deal.
And I had Thanksgiving with a good friend of mine, a single lady. And we had our turkey dinners together. So it was very nice.
Once again, got to keep that community around you. Well, knock on wood, which I'm doing over here. So, hopefully in a couple months, you'll be able to give everybody hugs again and see everybody in person.
I hope so. I really miss them. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have any other questions for you. Did you have anything else for us to hear?
Well, I'll just say I love the Civil Air Patrol. When I was a teacher in Riverhead for 23 years, Riverhead, New York, and Patty McCauley, who was head of computers, she and her husband ran the CAP, and I'd never heard of it before. This was in the early 80s. And through our friendship, I got to know some of the things they did. Of course, Grumman was there on Long Island, and they had the Cradle of Aviation Museum. So it's a perfect place. And all the little airports on Long Island, they have wonderful shows. They bring in the old airplanes. And so, but that's just what I would like to say. That I think what you're doing is great. And I wish more young students would take to that, because with this new whole space agency, I mean, it's just opening up so beautifully. So there's a lot to learn. Well,
I appreciate that. And I know a lot of our listeners are going to be CAP. And so for those of you that are interested, I hope that many of you are. Again, Sarajane, thank you for your time. In the show, if you're listening to this on a podcast, in the show notes, you will find links to the book, My Pilot, A Story of War, Love, and ALS. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can just scroll down to the comments section and the description, and you'll find the same links there. Sarajane, I just wanted to say thanks again for your time. Your story again isn't the typical that I would do, because you're not a pilot and flying and telling us all these harrowing stories of how you went into a thunderstorm and almost crashed into a mountain or something. But your story was really touching, and I do think it's honestly it's really important. For folks that are going to have loved ones, whether they're a mom or a dad or a husband or a wife. I think your story is really important. And so I hope folks will check out your book. And again, if they have a family member, a loved one, or a friend that's going to be going through that as well, pick up this copy and hand it to them. I think it's something that they could really, engage with you, over your written words. So with that, Sarajane, I want to thank you very much. And, if I don't talk to you, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
You too, Sarajane. I'll talk to you soon.
All the listeners, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. Okay. All right. That was our discussion with Sarajane. If you want to, connect, I have Sarajane's email. I'm not going to give it to all of you weird people out there on the internet. But I thought one thing I think would be nice is on Twitter. We have our Twitter, which is aerospace_live. If you wanted to send a note or a comment to Sarajane, you can put it in Twitter. And if you just do the @aerospace_live space and then a message and put Sarajane's name in it. I'll tell you what, I don't do this for other guests. I don't think I've ever done this for anybody else, but I have not done this for anybody else. So if you put Sarajane in the tweet, I will, through the month of December, as a promise, I will make sure that Sarajane gets an email with all of your comments, so that she gets a chance to see those. Okay. With that, I think we are done. I hope you all have a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you did, please do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content. Up here on the left-hand side, you're going to see another video from our this playlist. And if you click down here, you're going to see another video on our channel. Hope you guys all have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.